I grew up in faraway Rockaway, New York. Rockaway, originally named Rockawiki by Indian tribes. When I was a young girl, my sister Patty, who was sleeping on the bunk above, was crying in the middle of the night. She said she saw someone standing by the bed and was frozen with terror. She distinctly remembers seeing this figure wearing a brownish red robe and what looked like an eye missing, only it wasn't a vacant space. There was literally a black hole where an eye was supposed to be. Everything else was illuminated compared to the area of where the missing eye was. A few days later, and being the curious kids we were, I wanted to get a Ouija board so we could get confirmation and answers as to what the spirit was, but Patty refused. She said she didn't want anything to do with the spirit. I decided to take the Ouija board out anyway. She wouldn't even look at the board. So I put my hands on the planchet, and what happened was either the biggest of coincidences, or we were summoning spiritual activity. My other sister, who was also there, refused because she knew that messing with the Ouija board was always a bad idea. Then, the landline phone we had in the room started ringing. I hesitantly rushed to pick it up, say hello, but there was no voice on the other end. For 2 minutes this went on, and you could actually hear that there was someone on the other line, but it was silent. Very light breathing sounds, almost as if someone was trying to speak, but couldn't. A few more seconds go on, and the line on the phone gets a busy signal. A couple years after that, my sister Patty woke up screaming out of nowhere. When we asked her what was wrong, she looked delirious, as if she had no idea what was going on. I asked her if she may have had nightmares or something, but she said she couldn't give me an answer because she didn't think anything bad happened. I think she thought we were just messing with her or something, so I told her once more, "You screamed in your sleep." That was when it really sank in that I was being serious. She told me that there was definitely something in this room where we always slept, something very dark that we shouldn't mess around with. My other sister said a ghost attached herself to Patty, the spirit that she saw at the end of her bed. This really started to affect Patty for a while. A couple of days later, she said she had a dream of a dark figure slowly moving around the room in a cabin. At first, this figure wasn't even a person. It was just a dark cloud. Then it moved into the corner of the cabin and appeared to be a silhouette of a woman, crouching down in a fetal position. Then, she hears a loud guttural sobbing, as if this being in the dream was being tortured or suffering greatly. My sister woke up screaming once again and told us what happened. I think from then on she was convinced that there was some sort of haunting there. She couldn't sleep and was so upset no matter how many times my other sister and I tried to comfort her. She talked about it for days. Some 8 years later or so, I was reading a book about apparitions on Long Island. It was full of stories about Native American sightings. I suddenly remembered my sister's experience and how insistent she was. On a hunch, I wrote her an email and innocently asked her if she remembered the time she saw a lady standing by her bed, or if she still remembers the dreams and Ouija board incident with the phone. At the time, I didn't mention the book I was reading, nor did I tell her why I was asking. When I received her reply, I closed my email. I was so stunned. She wrote, "I'll never forget the time I saw the lady standing by the bed. Of course, she had the black hole of an eye and the red and brown robe, but she also had long, black braids. I believe she saw someone This past weekend I went to Spokane Valley to visit a friend. She informed me of the Spokane Valley Cemetery. I read about the 1,000 staircase, and I felt like that could be a good challenge. We got there in the middle of the day, and we could just feel the vibe there, and it was anything but good. The cemetery is in 3 levels, with some parts older than the other. There was one spot where the cemetery was unkept and very worn by time, which was also where the young and sick were buried. Still, every time we were in this particular area, we felt a kind of dread and sickness that we couldn't comprehend ourselves. In fact, anybody who went into the area of the cemetery felt the very same way. You'd hear distant voices that sounded like they were far away, and in my case, a crying sound that always seemed to be coming from the bushes behind the cemetery. It was creepy. Anyway, this particular time we were sitting there in the car, when all of a sudden, the car went on by itself. We couldn't even explain it at all, and it was quite terrifying. My friend's foot was nowhere near the gas. I thought that maybe it was just a car rolling, but then it started to accelerate a little. Whoever was there at that moment certainly volunteered us to leave without our permission. We drove on the other side of the road where the cemetery was more modern. You could sense the change in the air, much more peaceful and calm, almost a welcoming feeling, unlike the other side, where it is cold and bone-chilling. I was trying to find the staircase, which I found camouflaged in the trees off the side of the road. It definitely wasn't 1,000 steps, but certainly was a lot of them. I got out of the car and immediately felt a chill, as if to warn me not to go further. The thing is, I'm in the Navy, and I have Irish in my blood, so I'm a very stubborn man. That mixed with the curiosity, I climbed up the stairs. Each time I made it to a landing, I wanted to turn and leave, but I wanted to reach the top. I made it all the way to the top to what looked like a crypt. That was when I saw a shadow person moving in front of the crypt, with the crypt itself a small distance from where I was standing at the top of the landing. I bolted back down the stairs and got back to the car. I told my friend we should go back to see if it will appear, for confirmation, and so I don't look crazy. We both went back up there, and saw an orb this time, after waiting a few minutes. We didn't see the shadow person, but I think my friend ended up believing me. I've always been a big believer in the paranormal, and I've been lucky enough to have ghostly experiences in the past. I thought it was about time I shared a couple of my stories with a larger audience, as I really feel I've kept them in for too long. Experience number 1. I'm from a little town in the northeast of England called Hartlepool, part of County Durham, which has been an established town for over 1,000 years, as it was once one of the main seaports in the country. There are plenty of ghostly stories and tales repeated around the area, from the ghostly farmer who skis corn in the farmlands area of the town, to the ethereal monks whose chanting and voices are heard on the site of an old monastery. The event that occurred to me in Hartlepool is a different kettle of fish, so to speak. It was the day of my final exams at secondary school, high school, and I decided to retreat to an old art classroom at the top of the building, as I knew I could get peace and quiet while I tried to revise. My school isn't particularly old, and as I'd never had any experiences before, I felt content and calm. I settled down to read through my notes when a few minutes later, I heard a sound. Looking up, the noise stopped as suddenly as it started. Thinking no more of it, I once again started the read, only for the noise to occur again. Only this time, it didn't stop. What I could hear were the footsteps right in front of me, footsteps I took to be from a little girl, as they were small and soft, and the definite sound of a high heel could be heard. I was in shock and kept thinking I was imagining it, or the sound was coming from outside the class. But as it continued, I knew it was only a matter of meters away, and was getting closer. Suddenly it stopped, and a feeling that I was being observed swept over me. I sat in total shock as the footsteps started again, but they soon got lighter and lighter until they stopped once and for all. Looking back, I now realize it never scared me, more that I was enthralled and ruptured, then petrified. The sound was definitely coming from my right in front of me. There's no doubt about that. It lasted for about 20 to 25 seconds, which gave me enough time to hear and determine where it was coming from. The strangest, yet most fascinating part was that when I explained my story to my teacher, who had worked at the school for around 25 years, he told me that I wasn't the only one to have experienced this event, and that 2 cleaners had even seen the little girl. I felt privileged to have had such an experience. Experience number 2. A few years ago, I went on a lad's holiday to Portugal for a week or 2 of being merry and having a really good time, and to get me away from the bleakness of England. After several days and nights of hard drinking, me and a friend decided to take a break to spend the night in, playing cards and having a good chat. After a while, we both felt tired and retired to our beds, which happened to be in the same room, and I soon felt myself drifting off to sleep. However, around an hour later, I woke up with a start. I could hear voices, but in my grogginess, I couldn't even tell what the voices were saying. I sat back and listened to these voices until I could take in what was going on. To my astonishment, the voices weren't talking, but singing. As I sat and listened, I could tell the language was Portuguese, and rather than 1 or 2 people were singing, it was a whole choir. They all sounded young, boys and girls mixed in together, but they had the voices of angels. I sat listening to this beautiful music for a while, and then turned my head to the side to observe my friend, and to see if he was awake. His eyes were open with an astonished look on his face, and he turned to me and said, "Can you hear that?" To which I replied, "Yeah, I can." He got up and looked out of the bedroom door, and then out of the window, and remarked that if he stepped into the living room, he could hardly hear the voices, but as soon as he went back into the bedroom, they were loud and clear again. We both wondered where the singing was coming from, as we were staying in the isolated villa with no one around us for miles, until we both decided that there was no rational explanation, and that what we were hearing was paranormal. Taking into account that it was the early hours of the morning, just what was going on? After a while, the voices got fainter and fainter until they just faded away. I never heard the ghostly choir again for the rest of the holiday, and me and my friend decided to keep the experience to ourselves. However, on the plane back to England, one of our friends remarked about the singing he had heard on the last night, and if anyone else had heard it. At this, another friend also said he'd heard it, and he had also woken up to find a young girl at the foot of the bed. I've no doubt that the villa in Portugal was haunted, and I once again feel privileged to have experienced something not of the world. Thank you for your time. It's no secret that in my youth, I loved to hike or explore the woods nearby my family home. After we moved out of the duplex neighborhood, my parents moved us into our first home, a nice plot of land on the corner of the street, the largest yard in the neighborhood, a neighborhood at the time that was surrounded by underdeveloped wooded land, thick trees, with the abundance of the sounds of cars and such. So naturally, I had to explore the new land. This was the beginning of my high school years, so it was like starting a new life after getting this new home. My dogs loved it, especially when I would take them through the woods with me. The smallest of my dogs, Rory, loved hiking with me, and I trusted his instincts and nose when it came to trouble. This particular day, I decided to venture a little further into the underdeveloped areas of our new neighborhood. I guess the company that bought the land kinda ran out of money and left this part of the road up for grabs. It was a paved street that was blocked off by a street out sign like a roadblock. It didn't work too well. Some kids who would drive would sneak their cars through and use the empty back road for other recreational means. So it was easy for a young teenager like myself at the time to roll in on his mountain bike. Rory trotted closely behind me eagerly. We would travel a bit down the road, stopping to check out a creek nearby and possible trails to mark. Now, from what I am told, this entire plot of land the neighborhood now sits on belonged to one family. They then sold it to realtors. But since the land was basically open, it was also used for hunting. I would find old rickety wooded hunter towers built into the trees and whatnot. They were so old though, it looked like they haven't been used in years, but it was still cool to explore. Rory and I sped our way to the end of the road where it turned into a somewhat court. At the end of the road, a small creek cut through the roads right by a clearing. I couldn't get past the thick bush to reach the clearing, so I dropped my bike and continued on foot. Rory followed and would occasionally dart ahead to sniff things out. It turns out the clearing was an incomplete lot for our house, but the trail Rory and I found kept passing through, and we followed it casually. The trees seemed to get taller and deeper into the woods that we got. Then one spot ahead of us caught my attention. It looked so surreal that I couldn't believe it was in the woods. Rory and I approached the spot, and I noticed the trees in the spot were all dead. Not just dead as in no leaves, but dead as in no leaves, and completely stone gray. I stood there, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were 5 tall trees in what I could tell was a perfect circle. In the circle were leaves, just like in the rest of the woods. They were just as dead and gray as the trees, and the trees were gray, all the way up as far as I can see. Rory sat at the outside edge of the gray circle. I decided I want a clearer look at the strange small plot of land, and stepped into the circle. The leaves cracked and squished loudly as I stepped in. The air seemed cooler than the rest of the wooded land, and the sounds seemed to just stop. All I could hear was my leaf crunching footsteps and Rory's whining. I looked back at Rory to call him to me, but he just sat there on the outer edge watching me. It was very strange and stagnant. I slowly sifted through the leaves on the ground and found some old rotting 2x4s covered by a layer of rusting chicken wire. I tried lifting the debris, but it was thick, and the noise the leaves made were so loud, it was almost disorienting. Rory whined and lightly whipped at me, so I decided to follow his advice and back off. We left that spot intact and avoided it. In the years that came, I would sometimes walk by the spot on the road to see if there was any change. I could see the dead trees sitting there, as though they wait for me to venture out there once more, but I never took another step closer, especially after Rory died of old age. Now for the ghost story associated for what happened inside that circle. One night I was walking there, and it was pretty bright enough to see what was going on. In that circle, I noticed that there was a ghost standing there inside the circle from the distance. Me and Rory approached the guy, or whatever being it was standing in the circle, and he slowly faded away. He was as solid as you and I were, but it was so shockingly creepy. The weirdest thing about it was, the guy had a stone stare, and it was completely and utterly disgusting. Anyway, now several years much later, that part of my parents' neighborhood is completely developed. Houses decorate the once empty back road, as this remote neighborhood is now a fully active suburb. I went back to find the spot a few years back. I'd say about 5 years ago. Now where the dead gray spot used to be, and that strange figure inside the circle, a cute 2-story house sits there. Now, I'm not sure what that spot was, nor do I have any speculation of what it is, but what I do know is that nobody has lived in that cute little house for too long. Whenever my wife and I would visit my folks, we would walk past a lot and see it was up for sale. Every single time. I sure wonder if that figure that haunts the house is still there, inside the house, wondering why someone took up their area. Pretty short story, but I think stories don't always need to be long to be as terrifying as this one is. My big old house is situated just east of town about 4 miles, and was built around 1860 or before. We moved in when my boys were small. The youngest one was about 15 before he shared with any of us what he saw in the doorway of his room every night, a woman in a white dress. He also saw a man in a brown suit bent over his brother's bed with his hands raised and shaped like claws, reaching towards the sleeping brother. There were guests that also woke up one night and saw that man bent over the crib of their small child. My mother also watched a woman holding a child follow my brother into the living room one day. For the most part, I don't seem to be sensitive to their presence, just a tingling skin once in a while. But I was a little shook one evening, while home alone, when a book flew off the shelf. When I mustered up enough courage to walk over and pick it up, I noticed that the cover showed a woman in a long white wedding dress. I think everyone has seen things out of the corner of their eyes, only to focus on it and see nothing. I myself tend to blow light bulbs, at least 3 a week, usually more. They flare up into purplish blue flame-like bursts and make a loud popping sound. The unusual thing about this is that I'm either tense or stressed, or I'm entering an all-dark room and get an odd feeling right before I switch the lamp on. It's always lamps. But the odd experience I'd like to recount for you is concerning my 2.5-year-old daughter. She was born in ECAL, or with a cow, water sacked intact around her. In other words, she came out in sort of a water bubble. I've read that supposedly this condition denotes a child who has second sight, or some type of clairvoyance. Then my doctor mentioned this folklore to me, and told me to keep him informed. My daughter is a fiery, red-headed child. She is a wonderful child, just extremely willful and spirited. All the qualities that drive a parent crazy, but will hopefully make a good adult. Anyway, my daughter usually ends up sleeping in my bed between her dad and I, and refuses to go to bed unless I join her. So early one morning, we were climbing into bed, I with my back to the window, facing towards her, and her daddy, who was pretty much passed out. She sat up suddenly and pointed at the window behind me. "That's a guy, Mama," she says. I sleepily ask her what. Then she says, "That's a guy, ouchie head guy." I froze immediately awake. "What did you just say?" I ask, trying not to alarm creep into my voice. I nudged my husband awake and said, "Tell Daddy what you said." She says, "Look, Daddy, that's an ouchie head guy." Then she laid down to sleep. I just sat there, locked eyes with my husband's, unable to turn around. I didn't feel particularly cold or the feeling of being watched. I knew by the look on my husband's face that there wasn't anything behind me but the thickly curtained window. Then, around 3 days later, while we were in the living room, she pointed into the corner behind the front door, which was closed, and said, "Ouchie head guy" again. Of course, there wasn't anything there, or was there, but the suddenness of this was startling. 1 minute she was sitting on the floor playing, and then she turned and pointed, almost behind her, and said this. This happened around 6 months ago. My daughter just turned 3 years old in August, and my grandmother died nearly a week later. My daughter had only seen her like twice, both times in a nursing home for brief visits, other than times when she was a small baby. She didn't know her, and only recognized her as Grandma because that's what I call her. Anyway, one day, within the week after my grandma passed away, I was doing laundry with my daughter playing next to me on the floor. As a nickname, I sometimes call her Mama's baby girl, or baby girl. She was chatting to me, and I asked her if she was Mama's baby girl. She usually replies, "I'm Mama's baby girl," but this time, she replied, "I'm Grandma's baby girl," with a big smile on her face. I was completely astonished. She had never brought my grandma up or referred to her, especially without me talking about her first. I know that these and my numerous other teeny experiences, the kind I usually write off as coincidence or ignorance altogether, are incredibly common, but I'm curious to see where my daughter's gift goes, especially when she develops the vocabulary to suppress the things she sees. I just hope diligently that she doesn't outgrow her gift and discount her senses or second-guess her experiences as well as we all do. When we question and doubt the credibility of our senses, we rob ourselves of the experiences we all are anxious to have. We know it's there, but it's the fear of the unknown which protects our minds from it. It's always hard to wrap your mind around things that have always been just stories or make-believe. Children have no preconceived notions and just see what they see. I feel like I want to see, but I'm scared, and this definitely holds me back. Ignorance is bliss, right? I'm writing to you because I stumbled across your website and found some stories of hauntings at Norwich University. My brother and I attended Norwich, and I can tell you without a doubt that there are ghosts at Norwich University. Norwich is a military college, and most of the stories regarding the ghosts stem around the environment only found in a military environment. Alumni Hall is one of the dormitories on the Norwich campus. It is the oldest dorm located on the upper parade ground. The bottom floor of the Alumni Hall used to be a stable area during the time when muted cavalry was still in the military. The stable areas used to be a popular place for hazing at the university, and it is believed that the hauntings may be related to hazing event in which a student died. There is also a room that is blocked off in Alumni Hall. Some people believe that this room was blocked off after students in consecutive years permanently discarded themselves in that room. I have researched articles relating to that at the university and have come up empty-handed. I lived in the bottom floor of Alumni Hall my senior year. For unexplainable reasons, books would fall off the shelves, doorknobs would rattle, and doors would slam shut. I never saw a spirit, but constantly had the feeling someone in my room uninvited. My roommate and I both felt this feeling, on our own, and also while we were in the room together. Champlain Hall's reported to have a ghost as well. Norwich, like other universities, used to have tunnels between buildings to allow students to travel back and forth without being exposed to the harsh winter weather. Champlain Hall is the last building with evidence of these tunnels. There is a bricked-up entrance to the tunnels in the darkroom. The popular belief is that a student by the name of Lawrence Stillman was killed in the tunnels during an initiation into a secret organization called the Skull and Swords. Sightings of spirits and strange happenings have dwindled since Champlain Hall was removed in the mid-90s. Students have also reported hearing horses at night on the upper parade ground. I hope this helps. I would love to know if any further research has been done on Norwich. I've been a fan of your website for years. I love to read the new and upcoming stories that have been published to your page, as well as the old ones. I used to not really believe in ghosts, like many, until I began encountering them myself. My first experience was when I was right out of high school, and I was working at a bed and breakfast. I sent in that story when it happened. I've since graduated from college, and am now teaching in a quaint town called Woolmarket in Mississippi. The school has been registered as being the oldest in Mississippi, as well as one of the oldest in the United States. In the 1800s, the community was the center of the wool trade, hence the name Woolmarket. Eventually, a school was built in 1910 by the people of the community to help educate their children. It still stands and currently has about 300 students post-Hurricane Katrina. Well, 300 students we can actually see. We are not sure how many attend after hours. The faculty and staff just know it is more than one. This is my second year teaching, and I absolutely love it. The faculty are close, and some of us even stay after school on Wednesdays to do lesson plans together. I was told upon being hired that it isn't the safest place to be after hours, but I didn't realize what they even meant until I started staying late to do lessons. The teacher I worked with started telling me stories of when she used to have a classroom in the main building. She said she used to come real early in the morning to get things set up in her room before the children came, and she would hear children laughing and giggling in the hallway, but she was the only one at school. She said the intercom would come on in her class, and she would hear little children whispering through the system, but when she walked up to the office, it was locked. When I was hired on, the lead teacher told me she never sits at the school alone for the same reasons. Well, doing the lessons at school was just a lot easier for me than dragging all the books home and doing them, so my teacher friend and I began doing them together to make the time go quicker. Usually when everyone had left for the day and we had settled into our seats for a good while, is when we began hearing strange noises. The door to the main building would open and shut by itself, and we knew no one was there. We would hear little children giggling and running down the hall. The intercom would come on in different classrooms down the hall, and we could hear a voice that was not familiar. We began hearing what sounded like adult voices telling students to be quiet in the hallway. Last, but not least, desks would be heard moving and being arranged in different rooms, including the one I taught in. I would walk in, and my desk would be rearranged from the day before. When we would leave the school at night, sometimes after dark, we would see lights flicker on and off in the main building. Soon, things began missing. My lesson plans that I would have placed on my desk to be turned in the following morning would show up in a strange place I know I did not put them, or never be found. Then, when I began taking my printed copy home, my lesson plans on the computer screen would go in a sort of landscape mode, if you will, and would print out where the words would go off the page. There was no way to unlandscape the screen for them to print out correctly. My principal thought it was a joke and told me to fix it. But When I showed her that it wasn't setting on the computer that was causing it, she realized I wasn't kidding. When I started talking to the students and telling them how much I enjoyed them being there, my computer screen formatted my lessons back to its original setting, and I never had that problem again. But as for the giggling, desk moving, and the door slamming, it continues. In fact, while I was teaching last week, I think that one of the students from the past wanted to sit in on my lesson. The door was shut, and it just opened completely by itself, and shut by itself, and a piece of paper flew out on an empty desk up front. The student seemed to feel a chill in the air, and then it was gone. The door opened again, by itself, and closed by itself. My first graders call him Casper, and don't really mind if he pays another visit. My principal says she has encountered similar occurrences in the school, as she too refuses to stay at the school alone. She claims the police officer at night refuses to go by the north wing of the school where my classroom and several others are located, because he sees strange things. Many teachers feel that there are students who died while they were attending Wool Market. Others feel that they are students who attended the school when it was an agricultural school in the 1800s. Whomever they are, they make themselves known to many who attend the school now. We are not afraid of them, but the thought that they exist is kinda creepy. After renting a house in Longview, Washington, my grandmother informed me that their very close friends owned the house before I was born, and that they went there quite often. On occasion, while watching TV in the living room, I would see a man in a brown suit walking down the hallway out of the corner of my eye. When I looked directly that way, he would disappear. On my 12th birthday, my sister-in-law had got me a black balloon with a tombstone on front of it with the saying, "R.I.P. Youth." About a week later, I had just finished barbecuing some steaks and was sitting down to watch the Seahawks play a Monday night football game. With no wind to propel it, the balloon came around the corner from the kitchen into the living room. It stopped halfway into the living room and went back into the hallway towards the bedroom that the man in the brown seemed to be heading to. Halfway down the hall, it stopped, reversed direction, and came back into the living room, where I attacked it with a steak knife. After draining all the helium from it, I threw it away. Our daughter would not sleep in the bedroom that the man appeared to be heading to, saying she felt his presence and was frightened. We changed bedrooms with her, but I had no feeling of his presence there myself. I saw this apparition on numerous occasions, but never felt any dread associated with it. When I described the estimated height and attire of this apparition to my grandmother, she said it sounded like their friend George. I never saw his wife, and according to my grandmother, they were childless. When I was about 13 or 14 years old, I witnessed something that I'll never forget to this day. Every night before I went to bed, my dad always left the bathroom light on so that he wouldn't trip or stumble on anything trying to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I knew that the bathroom light was on before I closed my eyes. Usually, if my dad forgot to turn it on, I would do it myself. The light from the bathroom always shined directly into my room, and I would have my door cracked open so that the light would not be directly in my face. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up, but all I know is that every light in the house is off, including the bathroom, and my door was open all the way. I was lying on my side, looking towards the door, and that's when I saw a black figure standing in the doorframe. It looked like it was leaning on the side of the doorframe just looking at me. I could not see the face or what kind of clothes it had on. It was tall and slender. It did look like it was wearing a hat as well. It did not move 1 inch. The house was dark, but this figure was even darker than the room. I could see the shape of the shoulders and the neck, and I knew it was tall, because the top of the head was close to the top of the doorway. I was scared, and at first, I wanted to get up and turn the light on, but the light switch was next to the figure standing in the doorway. So I thought I'd see if maybe it was my dad or my brother playing a joke on me, and call out their name, but there was no answer. I knew that it couldn't have been them, because my dad and my brother are not walking around the house in the dark. They are pretty jumpy when it comes to haunted houses and going into dark rooms. Instantly, I had the uncomfortable and frightened feeling inside of me, and I laid down in my bed, then threw the covers over my head. I began to pray to myself like my mom had taught me. I waited about 10 minutes, then took the blankets off my head. It was gone. I jumped out of bed and ran to turn the light on. Then I looked down the hallway and in the bathroom. I turned on the bathroom light before I went back to my bedroom. The next morning, I asked my dad if he was standing in the doorway last night, and he said no. I also asked my brother if he was there, and he said no. I'm not sure what it was or what it wanted that night, but to this day, I have problems sleeping with all the lights off or going into the dark room to turn a light on. I have many stories from my childhood encounters with the supernatural, which I might share at a later date, but for now, I would like to tell you of my current home and the spirit which resides in it. The home used to belong to an older couple, who, as I've been told by neighbors, were pretty much forgotten about by their own grown-up children. They had both passed away of old age, and of course, the home and almost all of their belongings went up for sale. My husband purchased the home, and we moved in. Since the birth of our children, now 6 and 4, the kids and I have come to find out there was another person living in the home as well. It started when I was pregnant with my son. I would awake at night to find my daughter sitting up in bed, playing with a toy that I knew she didn't have in her crib when I laid her down for the night. I assumed my husband was giving her these toys off the floor when he would get home from working second shift. I asked him about it, and he assured me he was not even walking into her room, let alone giving her toys in the middle of the night. I started to watch her during her naps, just to see if she had found a way to climb out of her crib and back in again. I never once saw her climb out, or into it, for that matter. When my son was born, we moved him into the room with our daughter. It's only a 2-bedroom home. As my son grew older, we heard very little from our resident ghost. One night, I had just gone to bed and was just about to drift off when I saw someone dart down the hall to my children's room. I got up and peeked in, but there was no one there and all was quiet, so I went back to bed. I laid back down under the covers and closed my eyes, and right next to my ear, I hear an older woman's voice rather loudly say, "I can't breathe." For some reason, I thought of my son in that moment. Well, I jumped to my feet and ran to the kids' room. My son was breathing, but it was very struggled. I called my neighbor to come sit with my daughter and called my husband at work while en route to the emergency room. It turns out that my son had allergies to eggs, which I had never realized, and I had made omelets that evening for dinner. Since then, the visits to my kids are almost nightly. They love to hear me tell stories about the ghost we have come to call Granny Ghost. When they go to bed at night, they say their prayers, and thought prayers. They ask for Granny Ghost to watch over them and keep them safe always. I must admit, I hope she stays around too. My son may not be here today if it wasn't for her. She's welcome to stay with us as long as she likes. That is my story. Thank you for taking the time to read it. I would like to submit the following, based on personal experience, since we, or myself, have lived in these homes. Palmer, Massachusetts. This home was owned by my husband since its construction in 1927. Deceased family members often made their presence known by pushing us, whispering, talking out loud, and showing themselves in partial form. Bagpipe music was heard in the basement of the home. My husband's deceased grandfather. Tiny shadows dancing on a bedroom ceiling were witnessed. A dark shape flying through the basement on one occasion was seen by my husband. And in Oxford, Massachusetts, I owned this home with my late ex-husband. He loved the house so much that he swore he would never sell it during his lifetime. Soon after his death in 2001, his voice had been heard by a neighbor calling out to her in a happy greeting. A fleeting glimpse of him had been seen through the kitchen and living room windows. The house was sold at an auction in 2002. No word on whether or not a spirit has been seen since. Dudley, Massachusetts. Built in 1839, this home has been the scene of many hauntings, witnessed by both the former owner of the home and myself, as I had rented the house in 1983 for 6 months. A baby who had died in an unused upstairs bedroom could often be heard crying. The baby would pull blankets off of a bed in another upstairs room. The creaking sounds of a rocking chair could be heard from the dead baby's bedroom. The images of 4 men could be seen in the basement. Voices were often heard from the basement. A white image was once seen, streaking from the kitchen into the bathroom wall, which was formerly a pantry. Many cold spots were felt even in the hottest summer months. Some people who entered the home usually felt a feeling of uneasiness, like they shouldn't be there. Footsteps were often heard, the sound of a dragging foot. I later learned this was the ghost of a former owner who had suffered a leg injury during the Civil War. The home was sold in the summer of 1983 to owners who claimed they've never experienced any hauntings, but the house mysteriously went up for sale months after they had purchased it. Springfield, Massachusetts. My husband lived in this opulent home as a child in the 1960s. The entire family witnessed spirits of a soldier who had lived in the home before dying during the war. Fatal wounds could be seen on his body when he thought nobody was looking at him, but if someone caught sight of him and gave him their attention, the bloody wounds would disappear. Other sightings included a former groundskeeper, a small bright dancing light that may have been the spirit of a dead infant, and the ominous form of an elderly woman who would glare at living family members. A room on the unused 3rd floor of the home that held the remains of a wooden bed, and iron rings into the post of the bed, possibly keeping a hidden family member who had been insane or mentally disturbed. My husband's family members described disturbing feelings if they entered this room, as if a satanic spirit dwelled there. After my husband's family moved from the home burned to the ground. A chain-link fence was constructed around the vacant house lot, and nothing was rebuilt in its place as of 2002. I actually just remembered a story. I guess I blocked it out because it scared me, and it was so long ago, and I've added a couple of legends from around here. When I was in middle school, I would stay with my friend a lot. She was all into ghosts, witchcraft, and all that. She lived in the country, way out. One night she told me a story about an old house up in the mountains, that a family used to live there. And one day, their children, boy and girl, were left unattended. The girl had an apple and a sharp knife, so she could cut it. They began running around, and the little girl flipped over the couch, and well, you can come to the conclusion it wasn't good. She fell on a knife and bled to death on the couch. My friend told me the couch was up there still, and what she had experienced on trips up there. Well, being that it was so late there was no way I was walking up a dirt road on a mountain up to a haunted house. So the next day we started walking up there. We passed an old barn that was just spooky. You know how you can just look at a house or structure and get a bad feeling from it? So we continued up to the house, but we never made it in. As soon as the house came into view, I saw something in the upstairs window. I just brushed it off though, because I never experienced anything. We got up to the porch and could hear children laughing, and as soon as you got to the door, the laughter stopped, and a little girl's voice said, "Mommy." After that, I took the hint and took off running, leaving my friend behind. Well, it also had been raining earlier that day, so needless to say, the road was muddy, but you can bet I was running so fast that I slid on my side most of the way back down the road. So even though I'm interested in hauntings and historical sites, I will never go again unless I'm with a group. Out of that experience, all I got was a muddy side and sore leg, and scared half to death. I guess the little girl was wondering if it was her mother returning home, since she never saw her mother again after the accident. Another time I was at my cousin's sleepover birthday party, which he had in their basement apartment. So being like she is, she had a Ouija board. I know that Ouija boards are really only games, but this is what happened. I wouldn't play with it. Surprised? I think not. Anyway, I was sitting on the couch watching a few others play with it. There was a remote on the counter on the other side of the room, and all of a sudden, it was like someone had just pushed it off the counter in a range because it went flying all the way across the room. No one was near it at all. So later, when we were all trying to get sleep, we had about 3 portable heaters because we were in the basement. Even with the heaters on full blast and all of us girls in the room, the more people, more body heat, warmer room. The room was ice cold. So needless to say, I didn't get any sleep because it was too cold for comfort. There are only a couple of haunted places around here. There's a tunnel to nowhere. When the construction workers were working on it, it collapsed and killed many. If you go at night, and you have the nerve to go into the tunnel, pitch black, can't even see your hand in front of you. As you go deeper into the tunnel, if you have a flashlight, count on it going out, and also count on your breathing getting harder too, as you go further. Sure, there are explanations, but this is the story behind it that makes you want to believe it's something else. Then, there's Helen's Bridge. I'm not sure of the true story behind Helen, but all of the ones that I've heard can be summed up like this. Something happened to Helen's baby. She jumped off the unfinished bridge to her sad ending. If you venture onto the bridge, which is closed to the public now, you have to walk quite a way. If you walk towards the edge of the bridge and say, "Helen, I got your baby," she appears and tries to harm you if you're dumb enough to stick around. Another thing I experienced really did give me the creeps. Me and a bunch of friends were just out for a ride. They told me about the cemetery that is haunted. If you go through it at night, your car supposedly turns around and cuts off. Me being the chicken I am, I said forget that. Well, they tricked me. They took me into the cemetery another way. As soon as I realized it was a cemetery, I started freaking out and put the car into reverse before I ventured further into the cemetery. Even though I put the car in reverse, when I pushed on the gas, I wouldn't move. It had been put into neutral, so I tried again. Stepped on the gas, went forward, then put into drive. Well then, I tried once more, and it went right back into neutral. No one was pushing the gear shift. None of them even know how to drive a stick. So finally, and luckily, because by this time I was pretty freaked, it stayed in reverse, and I went home and stayed shook up about it for most of the night. Even though I didn't see anything, something was trying to force me to enter. My name is Joe, and this is my most recent encounter. At least I feel it is an encounter. I'm 33, have a very open mind to these such things, and do try to look at both sides of the story before I go telling my family. I also consider myself to be on the sensitive side of those feelings, as in being watched, hair standing up, those types of feelings. It was about 2 years ago. My ex-girlfriend and I just rented a new place in Malden, Massachusetts. It was very nice and not too old looking. 2 floors and a done-over attic with 2 bedrooms up there. There was a very nicely done master bedroom directly under one of the rooms. That room had a storage space not finished. The creepy event started on the night that our new furniture was delivered. I was meeting the delivery guys. I received the new goods and proceeded to start putting together the dining room table, and was alone that night. Suddenly, and I do stress suddenly, I got this eerie feeling I was being watched. A feeling that was full of dread and despair. It was ridiculously unnerving. I did have the radio on, so it wasn't dead silent, but that didn't matter. I tried to shake it off by singing, just so I could get my mind off of that feeling. Trying to comfort myself by saying that it's just because you're in a different place. You haven't got comfortable in your new surroundings yet. It wasn't working. Those feelings were getting stronger. Now mind you, I'm putting this table together in the living room, and that feeling was coming from behind me, from on the stairs. It's as if someone sits on the stairs and pokes their head through the dowels, sort of like they're in jail. As hard as it was, that feeling wasn't going away. So what did I do? I got up off my knees, looked at my watch, and repeatedly told myself, it's getting late. I said that's enough for tonight. Trying to kid myself, and left pretty quickly. I didn't say anything to my girlfriend about this since I just thought it was me. So I'm a night owl, and I love watching the TV late into the night. My girlfriend is dead asleep and is next to me in bed. It's around 1:30 a.m. when I start hearing a banging. Not banging like a pounding, but a banging, like stomping noises. These sounds were coming from my daughter's room above us, and she was staying at her grandmother's house that night. I mute the TV and cock my head to focus my hearing, and then it stops. I quickly dismiss it and then unmute the TV. No sooner I do that, that stomping comes back again. Now I'm getting a little nervous, because in the other room up there is her son. He's 5 and fell asleep hours ago. I shut the TV off, put a pillow over my head, and go to sleep, all the while wondering what the heck that was. But it did stop, and nothing else happened that night. Now mind you, this was only a couple span of days, one weeknight, and oh by the way, we had a mini chihuahua. I was going in the basement to do laundry and the basement wasn't finished, but it was still nice and had small box windows at about the outside grass level, and the dog was following me. At about the time I got to the 3rd step down, I noticed he was still at the threshold of the entranceway refusing to come down. I called, and I said, come on. He whined and fled back upstairs. I started to do the laundry, and it starts again. Hairs on my neck stand straight up. Goosebumps start appearing on my arms, and the feeling of not being alone floods my body. My fight or flight alarms are going off, and my nerves are starting to get shaky at best. It's not like it felt like a presence was right behind me. It was more towards the other side of the room, as if something was just hanging around. Being curious, I finished putting the laundry in the washing machine and started to go upstairs. I then started getting a sense of relief. Now this could be my own mind playing tricks on me. But as I got to the top step, I felt it again, but this time, it was like it was watching me from the bottom step, just looking up at me as I left. When I got through the door, I felt fine, and nothing really else happened the rest of the night. Up until now, this whole experience was a little unsettling, but nothing major. One night, however, at about 2 or so in the morning, I was playing a computer game. My ex was asleep once again. The computer room was small, about 6 by 6 feet, and it had a doorway, but no door. The computer faces the back wall, so when you sit by the computer, your back is to the very short hallway and stairs. So if you turn around, you can see both very easily. Anyway, I'm playing and feeling comfortable when all of a sudden, the stairs creak. I thought it was just the stairs being stairs, making settling noises and the like, and then again I hear one more creak. Now, the daughter, and she was home this time, was known for trying to sneak down the stairs at night and watch TV. This second time I thought it was her and I turned around, but no one was there. You hear one creak, you can easily dismiss it, but two? That's when the nervous thoughts start to creep in. Suddenly, they stop. No more creaks as I started to relax and continue to play. All of a sudden the room, even though small, had an open air about it. So if you sit at the computer, you could just feel that there was no door, and hence open. I felt as if there was someone standing in the doorway and making me feel closed in, casually standing there and watching me. I could feel eyes upon me. I didn't dare myself to turn around, so I look in the moment. Nothing. The thing was, it must have gotten closer, because very quickly, the hair stood up again. I started getting chills, and I felt a cold and tingling sensation. I then felt as if there was slight pressure on my right shoulder, as if a hand was being placed on it. Very subtle and slight coldness. It felt very much like someone was behind me and looking over my shoulder. This freaked me out so much that I shut the game down very quickly and went to bed, like a 5-year-old who's afraid of thunderstorms. The next day, I decided it was time to say something to my girlfriend. I told her what happened, and she looked at me like I had 10 heads, but still had the look of belief and disbelief. I asked her if she's ever felt any of these feelings that I've had, and her response was no. We went outside to have a cigarette, and the landlord, Dave, pulls into the driveway. We give him a cheery hi and she blurts it out. Joe thinks we have ghosts. I gave her a look of disgust and he starts in, laughs a little, jokes with me, and says, "So we do, huh?" I tell him about what's been happening to me, and I asked if he's ever felt anything. His response is no. This house is Dave's first rental property, and only the second to live in here, as opposed to the original owners. I asked him if he knows anything that has happened in this home, even the age of it, and he said I don't know. He did say it was kinda dated, but he never specified the exact age of this place. Well, to say the least, I never got to find out any more about what it was, because we broke up, and to this day, I'm still convinced that something is in here. For a while now, my sister has lived in a house a few blocks away from my parents' house. I live with my parents. I would go over there to babysit my nephew when my sister had plans. Some nights I would sleep over there. Her house always had a creepy feeling to it, a thick feeling to the air. My sister had just had knee surgery and wasn't able to take care of her son, so I was spending the weekend over there. The first couple of nights were fine. I didn't mind at all. But the last night I stayed there, I was in the living room watching TV when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a shadow. Before I say any more, I better tell you the layout of my sister's house. When you walk in, you go to the left and down a hallway. The open doorway to the left leads to the kitchen. The kitchen has another entry as well. The first door on the left is my sister's bedroom. The only door on the right is the bathroom, and the door at the other end of the hallway belongs to my eldest sister, when she's there, that is. On the other side of the kitchen is a set of French glass doors and let out into a game room, an add-on to the house. The doors are always kept closed and locked at night. The only people in the house that night were myself, my sister, the one on the mend, and her son. So anyway, I saw a shadow. At first I thought maybe it was my sister getting up to ask me to get her something. But the shadow simply vanished before I could get a closer look at it. I shrugged it off as me being tired. I lay down to go to sleep. I woke up a couple minutes later. It was around 5 in the morning. I didn't know what had woken me. I was sweating badly, and I felt like someone was sitting on my chest. I was propped up enough to see the French doors, which were across the room from the sofa. What I saw that night is engraved into my brain. There was an old woman outside the doors. She had her hands pressed against two of the glass panels, and her face against another. Her mouth was open in a scream. I was scared beyond belief, because I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't do nothing but lay there. And then the door began rattling. The woman was shaking it. A shadow came out of the kitchen, and the woman vanished. The shadow vanished after that, and I could breathe again. I don't know what the shadow was, but it did make the woman go away. I like to think it was my guardian angel. Who knows? That's my story. Anyway, and yeah, it is true. My mother was born in Austria-Hungary in 1908. When her parents immigrated to the US, they left their 3 children behind in the care of their grandparents. It was 5 years until her parents were able to return and bring the children to the US. In that 5 years, my mother became very close to her grandfather and went everywhere with him. She arrived in the US as a 13-year-old, grew up, and married my father. They were a young farm couple living in rural Ohio. One night, my mother awoke to see her grandfather standing at the foot of her bed. He was smiling at her, but did not speak. She relayed that she pulled the covers over her head and then looked again, and he was still there. She then tried to wake my father, but when he awoke, her grandfather disappeared. She had the overwhelming feeling that her grandfather had died. This happened in the mid-1920s, and at that time, international long distance was only a thing for wealthy folks. Her only contact with her grandparents was via mail, which would take a couple of weeks to arrive. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, she received a letter from her grandmother verifying that her grandfather had passed away on the same day and approximately the same time that he appeared in her bedroom. My father attested to the entire happening. This was always our family ghost story that no one ever had a reason to doubt. My parents live on a farm in Sugar Grove. My stepdad grew up here with his family as a child. On Christmas Eve in 1964, his dad went into town to pick up the grandma for the holiday. With him, he took a younger daughter and his younger son. On the way home, there was a terrible accident, and everybody died except the daughter. Over the years, the farmhouse was used as rental property until my mom met her husband. They have lived here now for 6 years and have had many experiences with the spirits of this home. I, too, have had some of the same. There are many, many voices that we hear. Marbles rolling down the hallway upstairs, foot noises walking up and down the stairway, clouds of light and dark smoke throughout the entire house, doors open and close. Things come up missing, then are returned within days. If you are alone in the house and stand by the sink, you will soon hear a voice that asks you to go away. It will repeat until you walk away from the sink. Standing outside, if you look up into the window upstairs, sometimes you will see a vision of a woman standing in the window. This is believed to be Grandma. I have an 11-year-old daughter that has walked into the downstairs bathroom and ran out, stating there is a man standing at the bathroom sink. He will only turn his head and look at you, and then turn back to the mirror. He hasn't spoken yet. When my parents first came here, they slept upstairs. They had to move to the downstairs room in the winter because no matter what room you are in up there, it is ice cold. We have used electric heat sources to try to generate heat, but it doesn't work. There are also apparitions of faces, white in color, etched into the door of the master bedroom. These appear darker at times and lighter at other times. They appear to be stuck in the wood of the door. It's believed by everyone here that the spirits and happenings of this house are all those family members that were killed in the crash. After all, they all did reside here, and I think they still do. My mother passed away a little over 4 years ago. Since then, we have seen her, usually in dreams, and my father has actually seen her many times in her home. My mother had been sick with a congestive heart failure that took a turn for the worst for about 2 years. My dad cared for her day and night. Finally, the last trip to the hospital was supposed to be a routine trip to remove excess fluid. On the way to the hospital, my mother made a prophetic statement to him that she would not be coming home again. When she was given the diagnosis that no further help was available to her and she would be sent home with hospice, she refused and decided to die in the hospital instead of at home because my father had to continue to live there and she did not want him to find it hard to stay at their home. 9 days of excruciating pain from a failing liver and kidneys, and unable to get her breath, she succumbed to death only after the last of our immediate family visited her on that day. It was as if she had waited until she had seen her husband, children, grandchildren, and son-in-laws before she was ready to go. 10 minutes after the last visitor, she breathed her last. Oddly enough, the grandfather clock in my parents' home stopped on the exact time of her death. My father has refused to rewind it. After 60 years of marriage, my father has been so lost. For the first year, she appeared to him frequently with a smile on her face, and one time told him, "I love you deeply, and just want to make sure you are okay." She still appears to him, just not as frequently as the first year. Recently, my sister and father had found a picture she had painted and had a frame to give me for my birthday. My dad saw my mother the morning they gave me the gift and said she was holding a shopping bag with a wooden frame sticking out from it with a huge smile on her face. He said they communicated without talking, and he knew she was happy and proud I was getting the picture. I've seen my mother in dreams, but only one stands out as a possible contact with her. In my dream, I was looking through the picture window at my parents' home and saw her sitting in her chair with my father standing over her, talking and smiling, as if he was catching up on recent events. I went inside the house and she looked at me and smiled. I remember how peaceful she looked and so healthy. I remember saying, "Mama, how can this be? I saw you in the casket at the funeral home." She just smiled at me and said, "Well, sometimes these things just happened." I replied, "Well, I don't care how it happened. I'm glad to have you back. I've missed you." With that, I woke up. One other time, after an extremely frustrating day, I was walking in a corridor and thought I'd heard her call my name. She said, "Susie." I actually said out loud, "Mama?" She was not even there. My sister says she has dreamed of her, but never actually have seen her. My son slept in my mom's bed about 6 months after her passing, and said sometimes in the night, he felt her sit down on the side of the bed. He knew it was her, because he could smell her perfume. My nephew recalled a dream he had the first Thanksgiving holiday after her passing. He said that in his dream, he walked out of his upstairs bedroom, and she was in the hallway. He said, "Let's go get some turkey, Granny." He said she replied, "Now, Mark, you know I can't go downstairs with you this year, but you know I'm here." My family feels that she is around us all the time. I know she is with my father the most, because he is terminally ill and misses her so terribly. I feel comforted knowing she is waiting for his time to cross over. My mother is a current janitor working at Rockford College, and one of the buildings she is assigned to cleans happens to be the Burpee building. There, she and some of the other ladies that work with her have lunch in that specific building every work night. A while back, she told us that during her lunch break, she saw what was a female figure walk past the room they were in. She said she wore a blue dress and had blonde hair. The room has a mirror that faced the only door of the small area. She said, and I quote, "I glanced at the mirror, a habit of doing when you're in that room a lot, and saw this thin, transparent figure walk past the door. I thought it was one of the other girls that was walking by, but it wasn't until I realized that no one that night was wearing a blue dress or had dyed their hair blonde. I walked out to see if it was a trespasser, but saw no one in the hall. I called security and asked them if they allowed any blonde, blue-dressed girl on the property. They denied doing so, confirming my suspicions that it was possibly a ghost. This is just one of the stories that she has told us during the last 2 years of her encounters with the Burpee ghosts. This just happened to me just recently, on February 8th, 2008, when I took a ghost tour of the WAGON Cemetery in Brisbane, Australia. First of all, I'd like to keep this to myself anonymous. Secondly, what I saw is true, for I did some research to see if anyone else experienced what I saw that night, and, as it turns out, a few people over the years saw it too. It was cold and partly windy that night when I turned up at the ghost of the WAGON Boneyard, Brisbane's oldest and biggest graveyard. There's a lot of strange stories connected to this boneyard, like a vampire. There's only 2 boneyards in the world that got fair dinkum vampires Highgate in London, and Tewing in Brisbane. The Bleeding Grave and Walking Statue. Yes, a wandering statue. Anyway, the tour barely began as our hostess was introducing herself when I saw something standing amongst the trees. It was solid and black. It was standing there watching us. I saw it, but I thought I was seeing things. Excitement that might have sparked off my imagination. But as I walked past this spot, there was nothing there to resemble that figure. But yet it was real, as you and I. It wasn't until a few feet ahead, I heard a weird clang sound right next to me, as if someone was banging in a pot or whatever. I thought it was the signpost rattling, but there was no signpost anywhere. Now that was frickin' weird, I thought, as I hurried on, looking behind me. Most of the night I felt we were being followed by something, as I was tailing Charlie. Best place to be on a ghost tour at the end of the line. Things started to get a bit stranger, like the cold wind I felt touching me if there was no wind blowing. The same thing happened again 2 nights later, when I felt something touching my neck in my own home, or seeing things at the corner of my eyes. When I turned around, there would be nothing there. I thought I was ready for the madhouse at one point. I know that I saw something, so I researched it, and as it turned out, others saw that same black figure at the same spot where I saw him or her, whatever the heck it was, and heard the same clanging sound I heard, so I didn't imagine it at all. I hope I didn't. That's my story. I've got other great spine-chilling tales, which I'll put up ASAP, but this was the first experience I had in years, except for the ghost of my dog who came back for a few nights to bark goodbye to us. My name is Tina. I'm 33, and I have a story I would like to share with you and your readers. I've been experiencing strange things for many years now, but I've only been sharing them for just a few people who don't believe always have the need to find something wrong with the ones who do. My mom was one of those people. She would roll her eyes and say I was crazy or I had been drinking. The day she became a believer was one of the most beautiful moments we've ever shared. This is our story. My mom had surgery in her foot and was using a walker to get around. I was at her house helping her with her laundry and such, and had laid my son down in the bedroom down the hall for his nap. Mom was kicked back in the recliner and decided she would also take a nap. All my chores were done for the time. Everybody in the house was sleeping, so I went out to get into the pool. I turned on the baby monitor at the room where my son was sleeping and brought the other piece outside with me. My mom lives out in the country. No neighbors close enough for monitor to pick up any other signals from a phone or another baby monitor. It was so quiet in my mom's house, I could hear the tick-tock ticking of the clock in the room where the monitor was. All of a sudden, I heard a woman's voice so clear and loud. It sounded like she was speaking into the monitor. It sounded like peep, as in P-E-E peep. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe it was just gibberish. That's what I heard. At this point, I start to run to the door to see if my mom is still in the chair in the living room. I got to the door, snatched it open, and there was my mom, still reclined back in the chair with a really strange look on her face. I guess I had a strange look on my face too, because she said, "What? What's the matter? Who's here? Who are you talking to?" I just looked at her and couldn't say anything. She asked again who I was talking to, and I said nobody. Why? She said that she heard a woman talking. She thought she was dreaming. She opened her eyes, and the woman was still talking, so she knew she wasn't dreaming. Having to always have an explanation for things, she then assumed I was on the phone, but looked around and saw the phone and my cell phone were on the kitchen counter. That was when I came in the door, and she knew it wasn't me. I said, "Heard that too?" "Yes," she said, with a very strange look on her face. So I went down to the hall to the room where my son was still sleeping and looked around. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing out of place. I came back down the hall and told my mom he was fine, still sleeping, hadn't moved an inch. She was a little freaked out, but she started asking me questions about my great-grandmother, who often visits me, and the places that I go. I never met my great-grandmother in person, but I've had many run-ins with her spirit. My mom didn't want to believe that Grandma visits her too, but after that day, she started to believe, not only in ghosts and spirits, but in me too. Thanks, Grandma Daisy. This is a true murder story that happened around the early 1900s in the Woods Memorial Circle, Mapleville, Rhode Island. This story is a more true and detailed story of the one before that my great-grandmother told me about. Catherine was a mill owner's daughter. She was a very pretty tall blonde. She was engaged to a local farmer, Robert. Catherine, though, had one problem. A man, who some say had mental issues, was stalking Catherine. His name was David. David would send Catherine letters of how much he loved her and how they could have babies together. These letters disturbed Catherine. He would watch her through the window and follow her wherever she went. One day, Catherine confronted him and told him never to talk to her again. David thought this was like a game, so he proceeded to send disturbing letters and watch her at all times. As a few days went by, he gave up. With this, he had a plan. If he couldn't love her, no one else could. So one day, while Catherine was going to the woods to get water for her family, David followed. First, he stopped at Catherine's fiance's farm. Robert was working on the farm as usual, and David came in from behind and stabbed him in the back with a pitchfork. Then he went off to find Catherine. Catherine was sitting next to a pond under a hemlock tree. David pulled out his knife and stabbed her through the neck. She screamed in pain as David ripped open her body. As she died, David messed with her dying body. Afterwards, he took her organs out, cut off her breasts, and nailed her heart to a tree, covered in blood. David went home and took a nap. He was supposedly awoken by the sound of dripping. He looked around his room, and it was covered in blood. In the middle of the room, Catherine stood there cursing at him. David had gone insane. He wrote his last letter to the police, telling them what he did, where her body was, and all that happened. He drowned himself the next day in a river, his body sprawled out on a rock, broken. Catherine and Robert were buried in a now abandoned cemetery, and David's body was thrown into a pit. During a biopsy, they found a heart in David's stomach. Some people think he swallowed her heart, while others think Catherine put it there. Still, rumors persist that late at night in the cemetery, you could see the couple holding hands as if nothing ever happened. I believe I had a true experience with a shadow person. This is my story. It was maybe 11-ish at night. My boyfriend and myself were watching a movie. The lights were dim in the house. The house is more than 100 years old. From where I was seated, I could see the dining area, which was dark, and the kitchen doorway, which had a dimmed overhead light on, and the light was spilling into the dining room. I noticed a distinct shadow movement in the light from the kitchen, like someone or something walked past the light. I turned my head fully towards the doorway now, and saw a solid black elongated ovalish shape towards the top of the doorway, and it quickly slipped into the kitchen. My immediate reaction was not of fear, but sort of like, okay, what the heck was that? I wasn't alarmed. I continued watching the movie thinking of explanations for what I just saw. Now let me tell you, there are 3 dogs in the home as well as the 2 of us. My boyfriend's 2 dogs were asleep on the floor by our feet, and my dog was by my side on the couch. He's small. He was acting a bit odd, nervous now. Perhaps he sensed it in me. 30 minutes later, he got down and headed towards the kitchen. He had just got his head in the door and promptly stopped. I couldn't see his head and shoulders, just his back end. I saw his neck raise like he was looking up, and then it happened. It took my breath and gave me chills. He started wagging his tail, slow at first, like he was unsure, and then the momentum slowly gained. He never got to a full-on happy to see you wag. Then he abruptly stopped and came back to my side. He would not enter the kitchen. And in case you think maybe he was looking out a window, no, the window was too high up to see anything. My name is Guy, and I would like to share my experience at Lambertville High School. I've been there numerous times. I live about 25 minutes away in Pennsylvania. My friends and I are ghost hunters, and Lambertville is a favorite spot of ours. The first time I visited the school was about 2 years ago, in 2005 and 2006, and I've been curious about it ever since then. I've had many comments about history of this amazing site. I've been through some of the school, not all of it though, because the building is in poor shape. The first time we went, we didn't encounter anything out of the ordinary. Back then, we had no equipment except our eyes and ears and flashlights. We really didn't venture inside until the second trip, but that was during the day and also uneventful. The third trip back to the school was a shocker that still gives me chills to this day. We went on a summer night, around midnight, or maybe a little later than that, and not a smart thing to do, but we didn't know any better. We parked the car out in front of the steps leading up to the school. We were to go in shifts up and into the school. 2 go and 2 stay in the car to watch for cops. We were there for 5 minutes before 2 of my friends came sprinting to the car screaming, "Drive! Drive!" Me and my friend, who stayed in the car, were wondering what was literally scaring them to insanity. What they told us was pretty crazy at first. They said that while they were walking up the steps to the school, they heard the sounds of little children, little girls, giggling and laughing. At first I didn't believe it and wanted to go back to experience this for myself. I'm the kind of person that has to see to believe, but it's the hope of that proof that draws me back to this school. Anyway, that incident was about 2 years ago, and between my friends, it has been just a story with no proof. No proof until now. Last week, May 2008, me and my friends met up again, thanks to school being finished, and decided to go back. We went that night around 10 to 10:30 and stayed there for a good hour and ventured inside. Though we heard no laughing, I'm still a believer. I believe my friend's story and everyone else's stories of little children laughing because I caught it on tape. I recently purchased some equipment to help capture paranormal activity, and the most valuable tool I had that night was my recorder. It's amazingly lucky that I caught anything at all, because I only recorded audio for about 7 minutes of our hour-long investigation, and all but about a minute of the audio has voices on it that were not ours. I also caught the voice of maybe a teacher or student saying, "Does he seem okay?" in a 2-minute-long conversation with what I believe is a female and a male that answers a question that I ask. I've showed this tape to my family and friends, and they all hear talking as well, and the laughter seems to freak everyone out. I wanted to make sure that what I was hearing was, well, what I was hearing. When I heard the laughing on the tape, I thought, my God, they weren't joking or trying to scare us. They really did hear something that night, something that I would like to share with your website, if that is alright with you. I just want to know that there's something other than this life. And that is what draws me to the paranormal. Thank you for your time, and thank you for reading this. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to ask. I'd love to share these clips with you guys and your viewers. This is in reference to your listing for the Hearthstone Inn, Colorado Springs, Colorado. This place has much more than a little girl. As a housekeeper there in 1999, I was able to experience almost all of the hauntings. In the south building, 3rd floor, the little girl would appear regularly, as well as the man in brown in the main bedroom, also in the southwest corner of the floor. He was harmless and would usually disappear as soon as spotted. On the 3rd floor, I've never felt alone, would often hear the little girl and running and laughing. 2 of the 4 bedrooms on the 1st floor share a bedroom. I learned to prop the door open while cleaning, or I would be locked in. The first time I was locked in, I rattled the door and was screaming for the other housekeeper. I was nearly hysterical when she let me out after about 5 minutes. Also in the south building, 1st floor, there was a bedroom at the end of the hall that used to be under the stairway. The back stairway of this building, when it was a hotel, led outside. Many of our guests reported having the dreams of the woman in this room. I would feel her, but never see her. I would have trouble with the lights and an unwelcoming presence. On one occasion, the owner, David Oxhandler, spent the night in the room, on having a very vivid dream of this woman and dismissing it as a dream. He was too shaken to go back to sleep. When he stepped outside to have a cigarette, he turned around, feeling he was not alone, and actually saw her, dressed as just in the dream, floating where the stairs would have been. Rumors she was the victim of a lover's quarrel and was shot on the back stairs. The last one I knew of was in the north building, 2nd floor. One room next to the stairs facing east was never pleasant to be in. The light was very temperamental, flickering and choosing when to be on or off. I would feel a presence on the floor, but really tried to ignore it until one day I was standing near the stairs with several heavy bundles of laundry to take downstairs, when I felt a pressure on the right side small of my back. Just a little shove, and I nearly went headfirst down the stairs, and not of my own volition. Last I hear, the Oxlanders were doing haunted history tours of their hotel. Shortly after, it has been sold to another local organization. Very much worth adding some info to your site, and thanks for the space. My wife and I had several experiences in our apartment over the last 3 years we have lived here. It began with hearing noises and creaks in the building early on, and slowly evolved to seeing shadows in the middle of the night in our bedroom. We both have had experiences where we thought to have seen a little boy in blue pajamas looking at things in our bedroom. 3 major events have occurred, which I'll describe in detail. Event 1. Summer of 2006. My brother was staying over because he is a minor, and our mother was going out of town. We had woken up late to eat breakfast and were playing a game of cards. As we are brothers and there is a significant age gap, we sometimes argue. I was being a little bit of a jerk, picking on a card selection he had made, when our kitchen trash can started to rock back and forth. We were the only people present in the apartment, and we were about 10 yards from the trash can. I investigated the trash can further to find that it was nearly empty and there was nothing that could have moved, so we went to the park. Event 2, winter of 2007. My wife and I were growing fascinated with the television show, Ghost Hunters. We had spent an entire day watching episodes from the second season DVD. Being cocky and joking with my wife over her growing discomfort with the mood the show was setting, I began joking about talking on the ghost of the apartment, saying such things as, "If anyone is here, come here and get me," or "You can't touch me, you're just a ghost, I don't believe in you." Later that night, at 4 a.m., I woke up quite distressed and felt that the apartment was shaking from a significant earthquake. I was sure that it was the big one and rushed to jump out of bed and pull my wife to safety in a doorway. She was in a state of shock as I lifted her out of bed and was scared of an earthquake also. When we finally got to the doorway and calmed down, I explained to her that I thought there was an earthquake but couldn't feel it anymore. She couldn't either. I began to grow very nauseous and leaned on her for support. I told her I wasn't feeling right and I blacked out. As I was blacked out, I heard sounds of people talking very quickly. At first I thought it was my wife, and I tried to tell her to slow down. I felt the sensation of running very quickly while I was hearing the rapid dialogue. I was growing angry when suddenly I awoke lying on the floor with my wife over me. She told me she thought I was having a seizure or something because all of my muscles had lightened, and I was screaming and moaning in a sense of fear. She said that I had also grown pale. All throughout that night, I felt the bed continue to shake. Event 3, soon after Event 2. I was angered by an experience I had felt earlier in Event 2, where I had awoken to what I thought to be an earthquake and experienced what I thought to be a form of being possessed. I researched how to hold a seance to converse with spirits present within the room and invited friends over to help with the conversation. I didn't describe the experience I had felt earlier so that it would not affect my friends' experiences that night. In the middle of the seance, one of my friends began to grow woozy and sway forward when he suddenly stopped it. He said that he couldn't go on and felt like someone was talking quickly to him, and he had felt the sensation of running, identical to my experience earlier. I shared with him my experience, and we decided not to continue. Also, this night, my friend's car got a flat tire while parked in my apartment, and only needed to be refilled with air as there was no puncture to cause the flat, as if someone deflated it. Also, another friend was called by his girlfriend within minutes of us ending the seance because she felt something had happened and was worried. He had only told her he was going to see me and not anything about what we were doing that night. The friend with the flat also received a phone call from his aunt about an hour after, whom he speaks with rarely, because she had similar concerns as my friend's girlfriend. How's that for women's intuition? Ever since that last event, nothing else has occurred. This is a personal experience that to this day has left me shaken. There is something wrong with this apartment complex. My experience centered on the apartment we were in, but from other residents, I heard other tales that made me really not want to live there, and as soon as I could get out, my husband and I certainly did. Pontrail Apartments located in South Lyon. There is a huge tree right directly in front of it. Apparitions have been seen in a little hallway between bathroom and bedroom. The panel in the hallway leading up to the crawl space had moved on its own. Personal experience. was actually in the bathtub and the only one home when it happened. I'm all of 5 foot, and that ceiling is a good 8 feet. There was no way for me to get up there. We figured that the only way to move that panel was to be up in the crawl space. Each crawl space is self-contained. EVPs have gotten into the apartment of a young woman with an accent saying, "Can't stay too long," and sleep. Both still have. If you leave the apartment door open while taking a shower, you get this feeling that you are being watched. Then look out. You see the retreating figure of what looks to be a young woman. I'd had this happen and thought I'd left my apartment door open, and it was a neighbor, and upon investigation, found my door deadbolt was locked. Numerous pictures of orbs and odd shadows have been captured in this apartment. All still have. Late at night, you can also hear someone walking past the apartment, and when you go to look, there is no one on the walkway. And considering where the apartment is, there's no way for someone to get down it quick enough without hearing the sounds of running feet. Have had an experience of having the front door hit several times while I was to peephole, and no one was there. Stories were also told to me of the laundry room in the same building is also a place of odd occurrences. Feelings of being watched and hearing a young woman's voice. Have felt the being watched part, but considering that the old furnace system was right there in the laundry room, I dismissed it. A lot of my family and husband's family refused to spend the night there just cause the place gave them the creeps, and this was prior to some of these events happening. I've tried to find out if there have been any deaths or murders or anything on that ground, and I came up with nothing. All I know is that the place was there was something wrong with it, and I wish I had never moved into it. The EVPs were caught when that building had few residents. I still have them, just have others listen to them from time to time to prove I wasn't crazy with what I heard. The pictures are numerous, and some still make the hair on my arm stand up because of the experiences with them. In October 2008, my friends Scott, Denny, and Steve and I decided we wanted to go ghost hunting. Scott was the only one who had experience with anything, and he had seen things and had things happen to him and other people in his past groups. We started off by going to Peace Church Cemetery and where the murderer Billy Cook is buried. We were equipped with a video camera, me, a digital camera, a digital voice recorder, a heavy-duty flashlight, Scott, and 2 smaller flashlights with the other 2 people. We walked around for a little bit as Scott instructed us to let our senses take hold of us and guide us as they please. If we got an impulse to do something, do it. We all had weird feelings, but eventually realized we weren't going to find anything here. We left, deciding to go somewhere that Scott had experienced before, the Waco Cemetery. Once we got there, we said our opening prayer and made our way out into the cemetery. Eventually, we split into 2 groups, me and Steve in one, Scott and Denny in the other. Steve told me to get a couple of specific things on video. He thought he had seen something he said was best described as a specter, with a head that shaped into a point and a cloaked black body. We walked around for a bit longer, and he told me he had seen it again. We walked towards the area he saw it, and didn't see anything. We met back up with Denny and Scott on the other side of the cemetery, and Scott started talking about the things that had happened to him here. He had been asking questions and talking in general, trying to pick up some EVP. He started talking about what he called the prankster that had slapped him in the face and possibly put scratches down his friend's back. We made our way back to the center of the cemetery where there were no graves, just a patch of grass. We stood around, and Steve told the other 2 about the specter he had seen and where he had seen it. Around that time, Scott said lights out. He took a couple of pictures, and the rest was silent. Then, we turned our lights back on for a few seconds before Scott repeated his order of lights out. This part gets a little blurry. I can't remember if it was before or after we turned the lights back on. But Scott is a big guy, wide and tall. He fell backwards onto Steve, who would have fallen on me had I not moved in time. He had fallen hard. He laid there and just looked confused, and his face was red. His glasses had flown off of impact of the fall. He asked where his glasses were. Then he asked, "Did I fall?" We tried to explain what happened from each of our perspectives quickly, as we were pretty freaked out, since this was our first experience. He had asked a couple more times as the rest of us came to the conclusion that he fell too hard to have just fallen from a loss of balance. I, for one, think he was pushed by some force. Anyway, we got him up to his feet. He looked around and said, "We're leaving." Scott was shaken, and that was all we needed to hear. As we walked back to our cars to say a closing prayer, Scott started coughing, which progressed into dry heaving. We had 8 Hardies before we went to the first place, so we knew that he had something to throw up. We stopped to wait for him, and after he felt better, we proceeded to walk to a space between the cars to say the prayer. Scott began, "Our Father which art in heaven." It was interrupted by more dry heaving. Steve said, "Scott, are you okay?" He nodded and said, "Hallowed be thy," and cut off to some dry heave some more. This time, it was so bad that he lost his glasses and was down on his knees coughing up something that wasn't there. He looked up, straight at me, and gave the most evil glare I've ever seen. I immediately recoiled in fear, with tears forming in my eyes. I asked Scott, "Scott, are you there?" He got over this fit eventually as Steve said, "Hallowed by thy what? Finish the prayer, Scott. You have to finish it." Scott straightened up a little and hoarsely started to finish, "Hallowed be thy name." Again, the same occurrence had just happened, and he just kept coughing and dry heaving. At this point, Scott has regained his composure enough to finish, and says, "For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen." As we each followed with a thankful amen, he said, "Now let's get the heck out of here." I was ahead of him in parking, so I started the car and drove out of the cemetery as fast as possible. We stopped into a church parking lot up the road. Scott got out of his car, and we started talking about what just happened. He claimed to have no recollection of falling or anything after that. That's the story of what happened in Southwest Missouri on a late October night. May you form your own conclusions, and I hope you enjoyed. I've felt the presence of ghosts at some places I've been or lived at. I've never had an experience of seeing a ghost, but I can walk into a place and tell if there's a ghost there. I know if it's a male, female, or child. I've seen dark shadows, but not all have been black. Some are gray, like the color of a rat. One night, a very good friend of mine came over and we started watching a movie and eating pizza. I saw the dark outline of a male child peeking around the corner of the kitchen. I told my friend Dawn, who is very religious, and at first she didn't believe me. I kept seeing the outline of a head and shoulders peeking around the corner. Then, about 5 minutes or so later, we started hearing a scratching noise. I told Dawn that's the ghost. She said it was just a mouse. Then, I heard a loaf of bread fall on the floor. The bread is kept on the counter far back next to the microwave. I got up to investigate. The bread was lying on the floor, but had no holes in it from a mouse. I put the bread back and went back into the living room. Dawn got up to get a glass of soda, and when she went into the kitchen, she yelled. She said the loaf of bread moved across the counter and dropped on the floor at her feet. She started praying. Every time she stopped praying, you could hear scratching noises. She kept praying, and the scratching continued. Then it got quiet. We finished the movie, and as we were talking, we noticed the lid on the pizza box, which was propped up, started to slip down. Instead of just falling down, it closed. This was very slowly. Dawn said she had enough and went home. She took the pizza and box home with her. She called me later that night and said that the ghost followed her home because her bread was constantly sliding off the counter, and she actually saw the pizza lid open when it was closed in the box. She said she threw the bread and pizza box off her balcony and prayed really hard. She didn't have any more problems, and our bread stayed on our counters after that. I was at the age of 12 to 13 when my grandmother bought me a rocking chair out of what she said was a yard sale. She claimed that they were very glad to get rid of it, and she never thought to ask why. She brought it home and sat it in my room with my dolls on it. It was an antique, so I was leery about anyone sitting in it. I never experienced any weird activities in it, but my brother at the age of 9 years was sitting in the living room where he could see it and claimed to have seen it rock 3 times. It scared him to the point where he just ran outside to my grandmother, crying and screaming. I was confused, and my grandmother told me to keep it closed and keep my door shut. Later, my aunt said she went into my room to get something, and she also seen it move. I was getting mad, thinking that there was something wrong with my chair, and hid it in my closet. The last person that had seen it move was my little cousin, due to us moving to another location. She agreed to keep it in her room, where she did not stay at the time, but went in and out of there when needed. She was doing her hair in a dresser mirror when she got a glimpse of the rocker moving. Then, to her surprise and fright, a little girl appeared. She said she was very beautiful in an older clothing. She screamed and ran from the room. It took her some time to calm down to tell what happened, and there I was, ready to get rid of it also. The one thing I did find out about the chair before giving it away was that it hated men. Due to my family's curiosity, my great uncle was determined to see it and experience it sliding away from him across the room. He was nevertheless very scared and left quickly. I'm glad I gave it away and didn't think twice, but never had it do anything in front of me. I didn't experience this myself. It happened to my mother a couple of months ago, and she told me about it after it happened. What happened was, a couple of months ago, my mom was prepping for a party in our kitchen at about 9:30 p.m. Me and my brother, who were about 11 at the time, were both at the house at the time. I was upstairs, and he was in the living room. My mom told me that she was washing dishes, and that she looked up at the window in front of her, and she saw someone walk by the hallway behind her. She immediately thought that it was me, because of how tall the person was. She called out my name and told me to do something for her. After a couple of minutes, she came to look for my brother to ask where I had went. He looked at her like she was crazy and told her that I hadn't come downstairs for about an hour. She calmed me down noticeably scared because she thought someone was in the house, but we couldn't find anyone. This happened more than once to my mother, but more noticeable. She was washing clothes and had to walk through the kitchen, and saw someone poke their head out from behind the counter. She of course thought that it was either me or my brother, but when she checked, she found no one. She called me immediately and told me what had happened, and now we believe that a ghost is in the house, but it doesn't show itself regularly. 2 other things that have happened since then. One happened a couple months after that. Me and my brother had a friend over, and he had gone to the bathroom on the 2nd story of the house. No one was up there at the time, but when he came down, he said that he had seen 2 red eyes down the hall near my parents' bedroom. He immediately ran downstairs, and we told him about my mother's experiences. The other things that happen more frequently now is that our dog starts to growl at something in the hallway. She sleeps in our parents' room, and sometimes she will get up and walk around the room, and then she will stop in the doorway and growl at something in the hallway. But when we turn on the light, there will be nothing there. It has been a couple of months since anything worth reporting has happened, but we believe that it is a friendly ghost and nothing harmful will come of it. Even though I'm terrified of this kind of stuff, reading stories and watching things on TV about it is very interesting to me. I have a story to share. It's still very fresh to me, even though it has happened many years ago that it has taken place. My husband and kids laugh at me when I tell them my story, just because some of the things that went on. They find it more humorously amusing than seriously true. This story took place when I was about 5 or 6 years old, in a house we lived at, in Oregon, Ohio. I really don't even know where to begin. The house was a 2-story home that wasn't huge, but sure wasn't small. I had 2 brothers, and they shared a bedroom with me, having my own bedroom right next to theirs. In their closet was this blue plastic hanging shoe rack that was left when we moved in. It was completely empty, except for a few bouncy balls and a metal jack in some of the pockets. Every day we would check these pockets because whenever we would empty them, there was always more the next day. I never thought anything weird about that. It was cool finding things in there. My room had a door that led to the closet. I never heard anything scary in my room, but one night, my grandparents spent the night. They came from Florida and were visiting us before moving on to other relatives. In the middle of the night, everyone ran into the room because my grandpa woke up screaming. He said the cat had crawled onto the mesh part of the box spring and scared him. Everyone went back to bed, and nothing was thought of it. Months went by, and summer was here. My brothers and I used to all lay in the hallway upstairs outside our rooms, in front of a box fan my dad would put up, because it was so hot. Sometime in the middle of the night, my younger brother Mike woke up, I guess to sleep in my room, and began screaming. He said my older brother's Jake's face was on the wall scaring him. Jake had been laying in the hallway the entire time with me and Mike. Still, everyone shrugged it off like the other things that had happened and figured he was sleepwalking. I've heard things throughout the night on and off after the last incident, but the last and scariest part of the house that happened to me, and I'm not sure how much time in between this happened, is one night when I was sleeping with my cat. It was sometime in the middle of the night, and for some reason I woke up. My cat also woke up. My cat was tucked under my arm at my side, and all of a sudden, it opened its eyes wide and hissed with its hair standing up on its back. Then it darted out of my room. I didn't understand why the cat acted like this, and seconds later, at the end of my bed was this figure. It was definitely human, but was all white and misty. It had no features or limbs. The only feature I remember is seeing an O-like shaped mouth. It was just standing there, but then looked like it was moving slowly closer. I kicked my feet at it, and nothing happened. I just kicked right through it. I was scared to death and ran into my parents' room and slept there the rest of the night. I thought I heard sounds coming from the drawers in my dad's dresser the rest of the night, but never heard anything or seen anything since. My husband, like I said, finds this humorous, so last year, he bought some ball and jacks and placed them on my pillow and laughed. I would love to find out if anyone living in that house after or before me ever had any experiences like that. I always wondered why that thing would want to scare us like that. My grandfather was a member of Washington Country Golf Club in Washington County, Pennsylvania. The golf club sits on top of a hill and used to be a very old farmhouse that dates back to the 1800s. He told me stories of him along with a group of friends who spent the night at the clubhouse. Members were allowed to stay there if they wished. It was said the old farmer who lived in the house lost all of his money and the farm went under. After this all happened, the farmer then decided to end it all. My grandfather said that during the late hours of night, you can hear footsteps walking back and forth upstairs. They went upstairs, and no one was to be found. Even in the ballroom, the lights would be seen turning off and on by themselves, as doors were being opened and closed as well. I myself have been in the clubhouse, which is very old, with wooden stairs and floors. I have even seen the bar going across the staircase, where it said the farmer had done the deed. I've heard this story from other members of the club. Whether this is true for sure or not, I don't know exactly. Another story I've heard takes place in Peters Township in Washington County. I've been told by an old football coach whose family lived in the town all their life, dating back to the 1700s, I believe. He tells a story of an old haunted railroad tunnel close to Hidden Valley Road in the area. It's said that many years ago, when the railroad was a busy place, a man was hooking up two boxcars. The boxcars then rolled together, hitting the man in between the two hookups. The man was cut in half from the two boxcars, and many people say that they have walked the tunnel holding hands across the tunnel very late in the night. They said they have seen a man walking at the other end of the tunnel with an old oil lamp in his hand, swinging back and forth. They even say that a train can be heard off in the distance, but no train even came. The story has been known as Boxcar Willie. I've heard this story from many different people in the past. I've seen the tunnel myself one night with two of my friends. We held hands going across the front of the tunnel. We all then saw a very small light at the end of the tunnel. Never went to check it out, but something was there. We all saw this light. It may have been something off in the distance, but I believe it was Boxcar Willie. We all felt something very weird that night. That's why I get the feeling something was out there.
Wait a second. You think you can leave this video without leaving a comment and even sharing the video? And if you're not subscribed, whoa, buddy, you better subscribe right now because this is a compilation and we make ghost stories here. Guys, no, seriously, thank you so much. If you could please leave a comment, please share, like, comment, subscribe, all that good junk, and I will be adios.